Taino from Boricua. I'm a second-class citizen, born and raised in a colony, and I still don't have as many rights as the rest of the United States of America under a fascist monarchist, system. And to prove the point, BadEmpanada did a response video to TurboQueer, who did a video about BadEmpanada and critiquing BadEmpanada and his many cases where he did anti-union and accidentally or unironically pro-Trump statements, and it completely ignores his bigoted views on trans people. He doesn't even acknowledge it or try to defend himself against these allegations. Este, as an outsider looking in, right, seeing these two people discuss these two videos, Barbara, did not do a good job, for the most part. And Barbara critiques the TurboQueer, saying that we're both making the same point that both ICE and the U.S. military are bad, but the distinction is Barbara said that joining ICE is less bad than joining the military. He doesn't outright reject the idea that you should join ICE, but he just says less bad. They're lesser two evils type of situation. While ignoring the fact that most people who join these organizations, and in the case of the U.S. military, because BadEmpanada trying to do a comparison, why people join ICE or how ICE recruit people is the same thing how the U.S. military recruits people, right? But people forget most people join the military don't do it because they're patriotic, for example. Studies have shown that 62% of the US military population, the people who join the military, come from poverty, right? So most of them do it are sheer for desperation survival. So if there's not a privilege thing, or it's a privilege to not join the military, because the majority of the cases people join are from poverty, they're desperate, right? And given that the United States government allows extremist people and people with extreme bigoted views to join, right? I'm gonna put a book in the description about that situation. That a study showed that 35% of the US military population have openly expressed white nationalist views and other similar things like white separatism, white supremacy, fascism, Nazism, etc. And somewhere between 3 to 5% of the US military population join terrorist organizations, mainly the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. And Barbara just claimed that all unions in the United States in particular are pro-imperialist pretty much by default. Well, Tuberquil points out that that's not the case, and when he puts any example, Bernard responds, that's just the exception, not the rule, right? Like they're the rare exception, right? Ignoring that most people in the labor in the United States are very anti-authority for the most part. Look at the IWW is the most well-known example, right? And we have to remember if the United States has the most violent labor history in the world, right? So it's like to say, oh, unions in America are imperialist, it's not only the fact the reason the ones who are in charge of these pro-imperial the labor unions, because the United States government do their damnedest to prevent any true revolutionary cause that happens inside of it, because your average labor worker is critical of the system. They just don't happen to have the capital to do something about it. And most of his response to Turbo Queer is either moralism, what the fuck is he talking about? You're making the same point I did in some shape or form. Not much really of a response at the and even with Jewish sexualism, Bennett Badal points out that being Jewish, you know, from it's a country Israeli and Jew outside is irrelevant. It doesn't matter, right? While Tobacco points out that it's not just a Jewish movement, it is a political ideology that could go outside. He doesn't really care about that because it is a settler-colonial apartheid fascist state for Jews by the Jews. If the one thing that Bad is actually correct about over Turbo is the poll, where if the Bad points out that most Jews are pro-Zionist, but there's a little detail. Instead of the poll that he used, which I think it was a bad example that Turbo points out, is around the world globally, there's roughly give or take 20 million Jews in the world, right? With the two countries with the highest Jewish population in the world are Israel and the United States of America, which together is roughly around 14% and 14 million people. And polls show between both countries, the majority of Jews in the United States and Israel are still subscribe to Zionism, right? While outside of those two countries, well, they support Israel but do not support Zionism. Although for me, I don't know how you could do that with and not the other, but that's different. Well, BadEmpanada it does fail to point out that it's not a settler colonial apartheid fascist state for Jews by the Jews and Jewish exceptionalism. No, the exceptionalism that he failed to know is not just Jew full stop. It's a specific type of Jew because they do have a criteria who is and who is not Jewish. Mainly, only Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardi Jews are actual Jews. If you're not one of those two groups, you're not Jewish. For example, Ethiopian Jews. They are the fourth or third, depending how you categorize it, the largest Jewish group in the world. Despite being one of the biggest ones out there, besides Ashkenazi and Sephardi, they face severe discrimination. They are not considered recognized as Jews in Israel, and in many cases they face forced sterilization and eugenics-like policies. And the part that Bernardo fails to point out that Zionism itself was not invented by Jews. It was originally an anti-Semitic Christian idea. Zionism can trace its origin as far back as 1580 by Calvinist Protestant Christians, who they believed themselves to be the true Jews, or like the was what a Jew's supposed to be. And later in the same century, in England, este, where after the abolishment of the monarchy and became a commonwealth by William Cromwell, right? They published the first example of what nowadays we call British Israelism, where they believe the British people are the lost tribe of Israel, and England is the New Jerusalem, and Jews must migrate to England and must force to convert to Christianity to start the end times and the second coming of Jesus. That is the origin of Zionism. It was a Christian anti-Semitic doctrine originally, where Jews had to convert to Christianity and move to England or at least some part of Europe to start the end times. The Jews didn't adopt their own version of Zionism until like 250 years later, in 1830, when Muhammad Ali, not the boxer, the ruler in Egypt, successfully conquered the area, and for the first time in 1,000 years, that the Europeans can go to the Holy Land. And in 1830, many religious Jews, religious Zionism, believed this must be fulfill some type of prophecy, and trying to settle there for some time. Although they basically failed at that, and they wanted to establish a theocratic monarchy over there. And these early proto-Zionists wanted to be an autonomous region, part of a larger empire, like a state within the United States, right? Like one of the 50 states. So be an autonomous region to be part of the Ottoman Empire or the British Empire or the Russian Empire, etc. And the earliest supporters of this Christian Zionism and later proto, Jewish equivalent of it were anti-Semitic, where let's kick out all the Jews from Europe, right? Because they do not belong here. So let's fund these projects without necessarily killing them like the Nazis did in the 20th century. That's how it was. It was originally anti-Semitic to begin with, which BadEmpanada failed to realize that. He thinks this is exclusively a Jewish a creation of Jews, while it was originally an anti-Semitic concept by Christians, in this case Protestants. And the first Zionist book that convinced people to do the first Aliyah, the first Great Migration, was Ottoman Emancipation, where it's a very racist book where it says black people and women are incapable to create civilization. And they look at Europe as like an ideal example. We must be like the white Europeans, right? Theodore Herzl, the father of political Zionism, who originally thought he himself to be the Messiah, later rejected that, became an atheist later in life, believed that all Jews must convert to Catholicism at one point in time. And he defended wanted to ally himself with the proto-fascist Cecil Rhodes and considered his project colonial. He was mimicking and copying the anti-Semitic imperialist colonialist philosophies of the white Europeans, because in Europe, the creation of the white race was meant to be a monolith to discriminate everybody who isn't white. And that includes the Jews, which they adopt as self-hating ideology. And the problem with Zionism being part of Jewish secularism is forgetting the early history of Zionism, where the majority of the Jews up until World War II rejected Zionism, because they consider it anti-Semitic. Agreeing with the anti-Semitic Europeans that they do not belong there. And in fact, most Jews prefer either assimilation, some form of socialism like Bundism, or or something else entirely, but not Zionism. They only become accepting of Zionism after World War II. Before that, it was completely rejected by most Jews. It was a propaganda created by the Zionists in order to convince people of Jewish exceptionalism. But before that, most Jews knew that Zionism was anti-Semitic or agreed with the anti-Semites. And Barbara century of Jews would criticize Zionism while ignoring the fact there are many non-Jews who are Zionists and not worse than the Jewish Zionists, like Christian Zionists, where they have a outright apocalypticist view based on anti-Semitic theology, which is how Zionism originated in the first place. And the very end of the video, BadEmpanada basically rage quit at the end when Turbo mentions Peronism. BadEmpanada just stops the video right there, doesn't continue, and he says, Peronism is just a unique Argentinian way of saying economic nationalist social democracy. First of all, that is not true. Juan Perón and Peronism was and is a fascist ideology. In fact, according to the Oxford Handbook of Fascism, Peronism is an example of fascism from above, comparable to Spain under Francisco Franco and Miguel Primo de Rivera, or under the Cambridge companion to fascism at the far right. Peronism or justicialismo is an example of Argentinian corporatism. It is a fascist ideology, and I don't know how you could be a third-worldist Marxist-Leninist while at the same time be a Peronist. Well, you can argue, oh, what about the Peronists who were left-wing and when Peron himself defended it? Yeah, when he was convenient to eliminate his opposition, but the moment he came back in power after his exile, he kicked them out and they say left-wing Peronists are not part of his movement. And forgetting that under Juan Perón, 50,000 Nazis fled to Argentina in hiding, but including Joseph Mengele, Adolf Eichmann, and the dictator of Croatia. So Juan Perón is a fascist. So if you call yourself Peronist, it probably that's where your anti-union, and unironically Trump supporting statements comes from, because those are parts where your Peronist fascist tendencies tends to linger. It is a contradiction to be a Peronist and a Marxist-Leninist to words, right? That is the problem. In this case, judging both videos, the original talk occurred 4.5 hour video and Pan Bernard's response. To be honest, the Turbo is on the money on pretty much everything. The only thing Pan Bernard was right and Turbo was wrong was the poll about do Jews accept support Zionism. That's about it. Yeah, you're screwed. I gotta put a source in the description about the literature of various topics. So see you next time.